The morning of the auction, it was 31 degrees in Asheville, and the oak trees along Marymount Avenue had finally let go of their last leaves. They lay in the driveway of the house in wet orange clusters. Nobody's problem anymore. Naomi Calloway had not eaten since the night before. She had been too busy going through the rooms of the house she was selling. The house she had designed herself, the house she was signing away that afternoon, along with everything in it. And the going through had not been grief. She had told herself that. Not grief. What no one in that parking lot could have known. Not the estate agents in their wool coats. Not the neighbors pretending they weren't watching from across the street. Not the quiet man in the back with the 7-year-old daughter who wouldn't stop pointing, was that only one thing in that house still mattered to Naomi. One thing she had priced at $200, expecting no one to want it. If this already has you, tap a like and tell me what town you're watching from. Stay to the end. The morning of the auction, it was 31 degrees in Asheville, and the oak trees along Marymount Avenue had finally let go of their last leaves. They lay in the driveway of the house in wet orange clusters. Nobody's problem anymore. Naomi Calloway had been awake since 4. Not because she couldn't sleep. She had simply stopped wanting to. She sat in her chair at the window of what had been her bedroom, what would be someone else's bedroom by nightfall, and she watched the early auction staff set up orange cones along the curb, and she did not feel what she had been bracing to feel. The grief she had prepared for had apparently decided not to arrive. What arrived instead was something quieter and in some ways worse. The specific clarity of a person who has made every decision and is now watching the consequences arrange themselves in an orderly row. She had built this house. Not with her hands, she was an architect, not a carpenter, but she had drawn it herself, down to the way the kitchen light would fall at 6 in the morning, and she had chosen every material. And she had stood in the half-finished frame one November afternoon 8 years ago and felt, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, that she had made something that would outlast her. A thing without a capacity clause. A thing that could not vote her out. She was selling it for $340,000, which was approximately $460,000 less than it was worth, and she was selling it because after 18 months of legal fees and depositions and her attorney's patient explanations of what the board had been legally entitled to do to her, she had arrived at the conclusion that she could not win this fight and keep the house. She chose to fight. The house was the cost. The auction included the house's contents. All of them. She had looked, briefly, at the logistics of putting things in storage, but storage cost money, and what she was trying to do here was stop the bleeding. So, the furniture, the framed architectural prints, the lamps she had shipped from a market in Portugal, the 12 boxes of books she had not opened in 2 years. Everything priced. Everything going. She had told herself, preparing for this morning, that objects were objects. She mostly believed it. Eli Hartman found out about the auction from a notice posted on a local contractor's message board. The listing mentioned architectural equipment, office furniture, possibly a commercial printer. He needed a printer. He also needed about 14 other things he couldn't afford, but the printer was the most pressing, and estate auctions were sometimes the difference between making the numbers work and explaining to Maeve why the heat was lower than usual this month. He arrived with Maeve because it was a Tuesday and the school had a half-day for parent conferences. She was 7 and had her mother's eyes, and her mother's complete indifference to being in situations that weren't designed for her. She walked the perimeter of the front yard with her hands behind her back like a small professor conducting an inspection, and Eli signed in with the auction coordinator and got a bidder's number and turned around to find Maeve standing in front of the drafting table. It had been moved outside with the other large furniture, set under the bare branches of a sycamore near the garage. And it was nothing remarkable to look at. An old architect's drafting table, the kind with the adjustable tilted surface and the brass rail along the bottom edge, scuffed at the corners, the white surface yellowed and faintly stained with ink, and something that might have been coffee. The auction tag said $200. Maeve said, "Without preamble, Daddy, that one's lonely." Eli looked at the table. He looked at his daughter. He had learned, over the last 3 years of being the only parent, that arguing with Maeve's instincts was almost always futile and usually instructive. "Probably just hasn't sold yet," he said. "No," Maeve said. "It's different from the other ones. The other ones don't care. That one minds. He bid $215 on it at 10:47 in the morning, against no competition whatsoever, which should have told him something. He was filling out the paperwork when the woman in the wheelchair came across the driveway toward him. He noticed her the way you notice weather changing, not because anything dramatic happened, but because the air in a small radius seemed to adjust. She was in her late 30s, dark-haired, with the kind of posture that people in wheelchairs often develop in direct proportion to how much they have refused to let the chair define the way they hold themselves. She was wearing a gray coat he suspected had been expensive once. She had a yellow legal pad on her lap and a pen tucked behind her ear, and she looked, in the blunt morning light, like a person who had made many decisions today and was now making one more. She stopped in front of him. She said, "Why that one?" Eli glanced up. "Which one?" "The drafting table. It was priced at $200. You bid $215. There are better pieces here." He considered telling her it was his daughter's idea. He told her anyway. "My daughter said it was lonely." Naomi Calloway looked at him for a moment without any expression he could read. Then she looked at Maeve, who had moved on to inspecting a row of framed prints and was tilting her head sideways at each one. Then she looked back at him. "That," she said, "is the most ridiculous reason anyone has ever bid on a drafting table." "Probably," Eli said. "She's usually right about these things, though." Another silence. The auction coordinator said something through a megaphone on the other side of the yard. Neither of them moved. "That table is mine," she said, not possessively, just as a statement of fact, was mine. "It was the first piece of office furniture I ever bought. I found it at an estate sale in Black Mountain when I was 24 years old. I paid $180 for it and drove it back to Asheville in a rented pickup truck because I couldn't afford delivery, and when I set it up in my first office, which was a room above a dry cleaner's on Lexington, I sat down in front of it and thought, for the first time, that I might actually know what I was doing." She stopped. She had not intended to say any of that. Eli said, "Do you want to pull the bid?" "I can ask them." "No." She said it quickly. Then, quieter, "No. I put it in the auction. It goes with everything else." She looked at the table for a moment. "Just curious about the buyer." Eli put out his hand. "Eli Hartman. Hartman Construction." She looked at his hand. She shook it. Naomi Calloway. He recognized the name a half-second later and did what most people did, which was fail to keep it entirely off his face. She saw it. She always saw it. "You know who I am," she said. "I know your firm. Calloway Design. I've pulled permits on 2 jobs that used your accessibility specs. They were," he searched for the word, "thorough. They were correct," she said, which is different from thorough but often confused with it. She didn't say anything else. She turned her chair and moved back across the driveway toward the front steps, where she positioned herself in a way that suggested she intended to watch the proceedings from there and did not particularly want company. Maeve appeared at Eli's elbow. Who was that? The woman who owned the table. Maeve looked at the table, then at Naomi's retreating figure. "She's sad," she said. "She's having a hard day," Eli said, which was the most honest thing he could offer. Maeve thought about this. "Is she going to be okay?" "I think so." He said it because it was what you said to a 7-year-old. He did not actually know. By 2 in the afternoon, the driveway was mostly emptied. Eli arranged for the drafting table to be held until he could return with his truck, which meant talking to the coordinator and then waiting on hold with his own voicemail for a while, before he remembered the coordinator had a paper form for exactly this purpose and he was overcomplicating things, which was something Dana used to tell him approximately once a week. He missed that more than he missed most things, the small corrections. He did not see Naomi Calloway again that afternoon. She had moved inside at some point, and when a moving crew arrived around noon to take what remained in the house, she was not visible from the yard. He thought about the way she had said it goes with everything else, and the way she had not looked at the table when she said it, and he thought these were probably the 2 most eloquent things she had done all day, neither of them intended for an audience. He picked up the table that Thursday in his truck, with Maeve in the passenger seat and the radio on low. He put it in the corner of his workshop because he genuinely wasn't sure where else it should go. And it fit, and it looked right there. Not lonely, maybe, but at least not wrong. He thought about calling the auction house to see if there was a way to pass a message to the seller, some acknowledgement that the table had arrived somewhere decent. He decided against it. People who sold things at estate auctions generally weren't waiting for news about where the things went. He was wrong about that, but he wouldn't know it for 6 weeks. Naomi left the house on a Thursday evening with 2 suitcases and a laptop bag and the yellow legal pad. She had already arranged a month-to-month rental at a motel on Tunnel Road, not because it was close to anything in particular, but because it had a wide accessible bathroom and a ground floor room, and she had been in enough inaccessible spaces in the last 2 years to know that the accessible bathroom was, of all the decisions you could make about where to sleep, the most important one. She spent the first 3 days doing nothing. Not sad nothing, not productive nothing. Just nothing, in the specific way that comes after a very long fight that you have not won, when the body finally goes still because there is no longer a court date on the calendar to hold it upright. She ordered food. She watched television she did not remember the next morning. She slept 11 hours and woke up feeling like herself for the first time in months, which she decided to treat as information rather than as something to analyze. On the 4th day, she opened her laptop. Carter Voss had sent her an email marked low priority, which was his way of marking things he considered important and wanted her to experience as a kindness. The email said, in its methodical way, that Callaway Design had secured a new contract for a community center renovation in West Asheville. Exciting news, the firm was doing well. He hoped she was finding the transition peaceful. He did not call it a betrayal. He never had. In Carter's accounting, what he had done was a kind of triage, and he was not wrong that Callaway Design had survived it. Only wrong about the cost. The cost had been paid by someone else. Naomi closed the email without responding, which was the same thing she had been doing for 18 months, and which would not, she was beginning to understand, constitute a strategy going forward. She opened a new document. She wrote, at the top, what next? She sat with that for a while. Outside, the motel's vac unit cycled on with a sound like a patient old dog settling down to sleep, and the traffic on Tunnel Road went by in its usual intervals. And somewhere down the corridor, a child was running, and someone was telling the child to stop running, and the child was not stopping. Naomi closed the document and opened the curtains and looked out at the gray November afternoon, and felt, not grief, not anger, not hope, just the peculiar weight of a person who has been defined by forward motion and has arrived, at last, at the place where forward is not yet visible. She would find it. She was certain of that. She just did not, at this particular moment, know which direction it was in. The motel's ground floor room had one window that faced the parking lot and one that faced a narrow courtyard with a concrete bench and a single ornamental cherry tree that was, in November, bare. She chose the courtyard side for her desk. Not for the view, there was barely one. But because the courtyard was quiet in a way the parking lot side was not, and she had learned, in the last 2 years, that quiet was a resource she needed to conserve carefully. She opened a new document on the laptop. She wrote, what I know how to do. Underneath it she wrote, accessibility integrated commercial design, permit documentation, compliance specifications, client consultation, contract negotiation, team management. She paused. She wrote, startup. And then, after a longer pause, start again. She sat with that for a while. The cherry tree in the courtyard had a bird on it, a small one. It was sitting on a bare branch doing nothing in particular with the specific determination of a creature that has no concept of having nowhere to be. Naomi watched it for a minute. Then she looked back at the screen. She wrote, find the right first client. She did not know yet who it would be. She did not know yet that she had already met him. 6 weeks after the auction, Eli's permit for the West Asheville Community Center renovation was rejected on a technicality he had not anticipated. The project required ADA-compliant structural modifications at a scope that, per the city's interpretation, needed a licensed architect of record, who wasn't him. His engineer had filed the wrong category on the application, which was the engineer's mistake, but was going to cost Eli the kind of time he did not have. He had 2 crew members on payroll he couldn't keep paying if the project stalled, and a materials order already placed, and a start date in 4 weeks that the community center's board had made very clear was non-negotiable because of a grant disbursement schedule that answered to nobody's patience. His insurance broker suggested he contact a consulting firm. His insurance broker, helpfully, knew of one that specialized exactly in accessibility compliance documentation. The firm was called Callaway Design. He didn't put this together immediately. He called the number on the firm's website and spoke to an office coordinator named Patricia, who took down his project details in a brisk, efficient way and said she would have someone contact him by end of day. He thanked her and hung up and went back to the materials spreadsheet he had been trying to balance. And he didn't think about the call again until the following afternoon when his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He answered it in his truck, parked outside a lumber yard. "This is Eli Hartman. This is Naomi Callaway." A pause, so brief he almost missed it. "I believe you purchased one of my items at auction." He sat up straighter without meaning to. The drafting table, she confirmed. "I wasn't aware when they assigned your file that you were, I'm the firm's consulting liaison for accessible design projects. I'd normally suggest a different arrangement given our," she stopped. "Prior acquaintance. But Patricia says you're on a tight timeline and I am apparently the relevant party for West Asheville commercial work. So, he said. "So, I've looked at your application rejection. The engineer filed under General Commercial Structural. You need an accessibility integrated renovation filing. It's a different form with supplemental documentation. I can have the correct specs drafted in 4 days." 4 days. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. That's very fast, actually. I work quickly," she said, as if this were simply a characteristic of hers, like height. "Send me your full site survey, your existing floor plans if you have them, and the grant specification language. I'll let you know what's missing." She paused again. "If you'd prefer to be assigned a different consultant, Patricia can make that happen. There's no professional reason we can't work together, but I recognize it might be." "I don't need a different consultant," he said. A brief silence. Not uncomfortable, just the kind that happens when a conversation has reached a natural resting point and neither party has determined whether to continue it. "All right," she said. "Send the files." She hung up before he could say anything else, which he suspected was not an accident. He sent the files within the hour. She responded within 20 minutes, which was either impressive or a sign that she had nothing else to do, and he strongly suspected the former. Her response was 3 paragraphs long and clinical: what she needed, what she had already identified as the primary gap, and a time the following morning when she was available for a call. The time was 7:30 a.m., which told him she was either a very early riser or testing whether he was. He called it 7:30 exactly. She picked up at 7:30 exactly. "You're on time," she said. "I'm always on time," he said. "Most contractors aren't." "I know," he said. "It's a problem. I grew up with a father who thought being 5 minutes early was running late. And it turns out that's not a habit you can turn off. Silence then, my first call of the day is at 8. We have 30 minutes. Walk me through the site." He walked her through the site. He had good spatial memory and years of describing properties to people who weren't present, and she listened without interrupting for most of it, which he found disconcerting. Not because silence was uncommon, but because the quality of her silence was active. He could hear her thinking. She asked 3 questions, all of them about load-bearing walls and egress width and existing vac positioning, and each question came at exactly the right moment, just when he'd described something that implied a decision she needed to clarify. He revised his initial impression of her from sharp to precise, which was a meaningful distinction. "There's a problem with the north entrance," she said. "I know. The landing's 2 inches below spec. It's actually 3.5. I ran the survey coordinates. The grade change starts earlier than your engineer marked. If you pour the concrete at the specs in your current plan, you'll be out of compliance before anyone lifts a wheelchair over the threshold." She said it without emphasis, just information landing in its place. "I'll include the correction in the specs. It'll add roughly 6 hours of labor, but you'll avoid a reinspection." "Thank you," he said. She made a sound that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite dismissal. She said the specs would be ready by Thursday and ended the call. He messaged Patricia to confirm the arrangement was official. Patricia messaged back, almost immediately, working with Naomi is the most efficient thing you'll ever do, and occasionally the most challenging. Good luck. He appreciated the honesty. The specs arrived Thursday morning, 47 pages. Organized in a way that his engineer described, with something approaching reverence as forensically clear. Eli spent Thursday afternoon reading them and finding no errors, which was unusual enough that he mentioned it to Naomi on their Friday call. She said she proofread twice before sending anything to a client, which she said the same way she said everything, as if the alternative had simply never occurred to her. You should know, she said on the same call, that the grant language has a complication. He pulled the grant specification document on his screen. Which section? Section 4B. The disbursement condition requires the project to be certified by a licensed architect of record who is listed on the original grant application. That name is a firm called Ashford Associates. They went out of business in March. He stared at the screen. What does that mean for the timeline? It means you need a variance request filed with the city before you can proceed. It's a standard form, but it requires a written endorsement from the grant body, and the grant body's contact is a woman named Dr. Patricia Osei at the Western Carolina Community Development Office, and she is famously very hard to reach. A pause. I know her. You know her. We sat on an advisory board together in 2021. I can call her Monday. He waited. He had a feeling there was more. I'll charge my standard consulting rate for the call, she said. I want to be transparent about that. If you'd prefer to pursue the variance through normal channels, call her, he said. Please, she called Monday. Dr. Osei responded Tuesday. The variance endorsement arrived by email Wednesday afternoon, which Patricia at Callaway Design described as an act of God, and Naomi described, when he mentioned it, as simply a consequence of knowing the right person and asking clearly. He noticed she didn't take credit for it. She stated it as a sequence of events. This was the third week. In the fourth week, they moved to video calls because she needed to review the elevation drawings with him, and the drawings were large. He set up his laptop on the kitchen table after Maeve was in bed, and she appeared on his screen in what was clearly a motel room. He could see the particular beige of motel furniture behind her, the standard print on the wall, the yellow legal pad on the table beside her, and she was wearing glasses he hadn't seen before, and had her hair pulled back, and there was a coffee cup near her elbow that she ignored for the duration of the call. You're in a motel, he said, because the words were out before his brain had a chance to manage them. She looked at him over the top of her glasses. Correct, I thought. He stopped. Never mind. You thought I'd bought somewhere else after the auction. I haven't yet. The timeline for that is pending. She said it with the same flat precision she used for building specifications, and he understood, quite clearly, that this was not a topic for further inquiry. Page 7, she said. The door swing on the interior restroom is wrong. He looked at page 7. That's the engineer's. It's 2 inches too narrow when the door is at 90 degrees. A manual chair user can enter, but they can't turn. You need a 26-inch clear opening in the open position, not 24. Tell your engineer to move the partition. Right, he said. Page 11. The grab bar placement at the second accessible stall is the right height but the wrong wall. It needs to be the transfer side wall. I've marked it in red. He flipped to page 11. Red marking, as promised. Got it. She went on like this for 45 minutes, systematic and unhurried. And he took notes and asked questions, and she answered them without condescension, which he was starting to understand was a specific quality of hers. She did not explain things in the way people explain things to people they consider less capable. She explained the way someone explains to a colleague who simply hasn't been given this particular information yet. Around 9:15 she stopped and looked at something off screen. She had been in the middle of a sentence about the drinking fountain height requirements, and she stopped mid-sentence, and she looked to her left, and she was still. Everything all right? He said. She didn't answer immediately. Then, yes. She looked back at him. My foot moved, she said. Just that. He wasn't sure how to respond to this. He said, carefully, is that unusual? She looked at him for a moment. Her expression didn't change. "We were on page 15, she said. They moved to page 15. He thought about it after the call, sitting in his kitchen with the laptop closed. He had Googled her injury in the first week, briefly, guiltily. The way you Google things you feel you should already know, and had read enough to understand that incomplete spinal cord injuries existed on a spectrum, that some people with her level of injury retained partial sensation, that recovery was possible but rare, and not something to assume. He did not fully understand what my foot moved meant in the context of any of that. He thought it might mean nothing. He thought, in the cautious way he had learned to think about things he couldn't control, that it might mean something. He did not bring it up again. He also did not forget it. She sent the corrected elevation drawings on Thursday with a note. Engineer should confirm partition move within 48 hours or we lose the permit window. He forwarded it to his engineer within the hour. His engineer confirmed within 48 hours. The permit came through on a Friday afternoon at 2:40. He texted Naomi without thinking much about it. Permit approved. Thank you. Her response 20 minutes later, good. Send me the construction schedule when you have it. He did. She sent back 3 corrections. He was beginning to understand this was how she expressed approval. By the 5th week, they had settled into a rhythm that had no formal name, but that both of them seemed to understand. He called Mondays with questions that had accumulated over the weekend. She called Wednesdays with things she'd identified in the documents he'd sent. Friday evenings were longer, an hour sometimes, an hour and a half, and the ratio of work discussion to the other kind shifted, gradually, without either of them deciding it should. He found out she drank her coffee black, because she said so in response to a question she didn't explain. She found out he had a 7-year-old daughter, because Maeve walked through the background of a video call carrying a violin case, and Naomi said, "Is that your kid?" With the slightly bewildered expression of someone encountering evidence of a whole world they'd not accounted for. "That's Maeve," he said. "She's learning violin." Naomi watched Maeve disappear through a doorway. "How's that going?" "Roughly," he said. "But she's committed." Something almost softened at the edge of her expression. Not a smile. The ghost of the decision not to maintain full distance. The accessible parking configuration, she said, and they were back to the plans. But he had noticed. She was not cruel to him. That was the thing he found himself thinking, in the evenings after calls. The expectation he'd arrived with, and the reality he'd encountered. Efficient, yes, precise to the point of occasional asperity. Impatient with his engineer in ways that were usually, on review, justified, but not cruel to him. He didn't know yet whether she simply hadn't found occasion, or whether he was, in some way he hadn't identified, not provoking what was usually provoked. He thought about what she had said at the auction. It goes with everything else. He thought about the yellow legal pad, and the motel beige, and the empty coffee cup, and the specific stillness of a person who has run very fast for a very long time, and has just, in this particular moment, stopped. He thought, I know what that looks like. He had looked like that for about 6 months after Dana died. He had looked like that until Maeve, one morning, had asked him to make pancakes, and the requirement to make pancakes had been so simple and so immediate that it had bypassed everything complicated, and he had made the pancakes. And then the next morning, he had made them again, and eventually making pancakes had become a kind of evidence that he was still present in the world. He sent Naomi a coffee delivery on a Thursday morning to the motel on Tunnel Road, through a local cafe that did contactless delivery. He did not mention it. He included a note that said only construction schedule updated, start date confirmed. Which was also true. She did not respond to the coffee. She did send him a separate message 40 minutes later. The new schedule has a sequencing problem on day 9. The accessible restroom partition can't go in before the main structural inspection. Move it to day 12. He moved it to day 12. He thought. She accepted the coffee. That was enough for now. The 4th week, she sent him a document he had not asked for. A handwritten inventory of every accessibility specification error she had found in a community center renovation case study from Denver. She had annotated it in the margins in dense, precise handwriting, and she had scanned it and emailed it to him with no subject line and no message in the body of the email. Just the document. He spent 40 minutes reading it, and came away with a list of 9 things he needed to re-examine on his own project, all of which she had known he would need to examine, and had given him the tools to do so without being asked. He wrote back, "Thank you for this. It's extremely useful." She wrote back, "The third annotation is wrong. I found a newer standard after I scanned it. I'll send the correction." She sent the correction 11 minutes later. He filed both documents. He had begun to notice a pattern in the way she operated, which was not precisely that she was kind, but that she was thorough in a way that had the same effect as kindness. She anticipated what you needed before you knew you needed it, and she provided it without fanfare, and she moved on. He had worked with enough consultants to know that this was rare. Most consultants told you what they found. She told you what you would need to know because of what she had found, which was a different and more demanding discipline. He mentioned this on a Friday call, not entirely meaning to. She was in the middle of explaining a correction to the permit attachment schedule, and he said, "Without planning it, you do that thing where you tell me what I'll need before I know I need it." She stopped. What thing? The Denver case study. The 11-minute correction. The thing where you're 3 steps ahead and you document all of them. A pause. I was taught by an engineer who said that providing information in response to a problem already reported was halfway to useful. Providing information that prevents the problem is useful. Another pause, smaller. She was a very good engineer. She retired in 2019. What was her name? Judith Branscombe. She ran accessibility compliance for the Southeast region for 20 years before she went independent. Naomi said the name with the particular flatness people use for people who mattered to them. She's the reason I can do this work. She didn't tolerate imprecision, and she didn't tolerate underestimating a client's ability to understand their own project. She said that talking down to people was just another form of inaccessibility. He thought about this. She sounds like someone I'd want on a job site. She would have been furious at your engineer's original permit filing. She would have been right. A pause. Then, quieter, she would have liked you. She said it as if she hadn't fully intended to. He let a moment go by. Then, the permit attachment schedule, he said. Where were we? Third item, she said, and they went back to the work, and the thing she had said stayed in the air without either of them addressing it again, which was its own kind of address. He thought about it later. He thought about Judith Branscombe and the engineer's discipline and the way Naomi had said her name, and he thought about how people carry their teachers with them the way they carry their losses. Not as weights, but as architectures, the invisible frameworks the self was built around and keeps building around long after the source is gone. He had been built around his father's weekend job sites, and around Dana's belief that love was not a performance, and around 3 years of pancakes for a 7-year-old who kept showing him that small things done consistently were the same as large things done once. He had frameworks. They were just different ones. On a Thursday in the 5th week, Maeve asked him at dinner why he talked on the phone so much. He said, "Work?" Maeve said, "Is it the table lady?" He said, "Her name is Naomi." Maeve considered this. "She seems nice." "She is," he said. "Not complicated nice, not easy nice, just is." "Does she have a little girl?" "No." Maeve absorbed this. "Is she lonely?" He thought about the motel room and the yellow legal pad and the coffee cup she always let go cold. He thought about the auction and everything she had priced, and everything she had said goes with everything else. "She's working on that," he said, which was the truest thing he could offer. Maeve seemed to find this answer acceptable. She went back to her dinner. He thought about it for 3 days. The 6th week brought an ice storm that closed the site for 2 days and knocked out a section of the construction access road. Eli spent both days on the phone managing logistics and supplier rescheduling, and he called Naomi on Tuesday not because there was anything specific to discuss, but because he had gotten into the habit of talking through problems out loud, and she had. Without announcing it, become the person he talked them through with. She answered on the 2nd ring. "The road closure. You heard. I have alerts on local dot updates for the project zone. Give me the contractor who is going to pour the subbase. I'll find you a replacement. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Give me the name of the work that needs doing, so I can find someone who can do it. She paused. Unless you were calling for another reason. He hadn't been calling for another reason. He also hadn't been calling just for the road closure. He recognized this about himself clearly enough to be honest about it, and he also recognized clearly enough that honesty on this particular point was not useful right now. Just the road closure, he said. Then give me the spec for the subbase. He gave her the spec. She called him back in 90 minutes with 2 contractor names, both of them available on the schedule he needed. Both of them vetted. She said vetted with a flatness that communicated she meant something more rigorous than the word usually implied. He called the first one and they sorted it out in 20 minutes. He texted her, sorted. Thank you. She texted back, you're behind a day. Adjust the masonry sequence or it'll cascade. He adjusted the masonry sequence. What he did not say in any of the texts or the calls was that he had been thinking about her at odd moments during the 2-day closure. Not in a complicated way, in the simple, practical way of a person who has found someone competent and keeps returning to that competence when facing problems. He told himself this was what it was. He had told himself this about Dana too, in the beginning. It had also been true about Dana. And it had also been something else. He was being careful. Dana had been gone 3 years, and he had been careful for 3 years, and he was not at a point where careful was ready to become something other than itself. He knew this about himself. He also knew, from watching Maeve watching Naomi through the screen, Maeve, who had a 7-year-old's uncanny gift for identifying where the important things were, that careful was not the same as closed. Maeve had not stopped asking about the table lady. He had not stopped, not knowing what to tell her. In the 7th week, Naomi came to the site. He hadn't expected it. She had mentioned, once, that she reviewed accessibility compliance through site photography and documentation, that physical visits were, she had chosen the word deliberately, not always practical. He had taken this to mean she didn't do them. He arrived at the site on a Wednesday morning and found her there in the parking area that his crew had temporarily expanded to accommodate material deliveries. Her chair parked on the edge of the concrete looking at the north entrance. The north entrance where the landing had been 3.5 inches below spec. It had been corrected. The concrete had been poured at the right grade 2 weeks ago, checked and signed off by his engineer. But she was looking at it. He parked and walked over. You're here. I'm here. She didn't look away from the entrance. I wanted to see the landing. The photo documentation was ambiguous on the grade transition. He stood next to her and looked at the landing. The transition from the parking surface to the accessible entrance path was clean, the slope gentle and correct, the texture strip properly placed, the tactile warning surface at the right distance from the curb. It looks right to me, he said. It is right, she said. I wanted to confirm it myself. A pause. I also wanted to see what you'd done with the interior egress corridor. The dimensions on paper were correct, but I wanted to see the actual clearances. He brought her through the building. It was in mid-construction, bare studs in places, new accessible bathroom framework standing in the northeast corner, temporary lighting strung from the ceiling. His crew was on the other side of the building and gave them space, which he appreciated. She moved through the space slowly, which he had expected, but she moved through it the way she moved through everything, with a quality of attention that was not inspection, but something more like reading. The space was text to her. She was finding what it said. She stopped at the accessible restroom partition, the one that had been moved from day 9 to day 12. She looked at the framing, the clearance, the door rough in. She said, "Good, that was all. Just good," in the same tone she used when something was correct. He thought it was probably the highest compliment in her vocabulary. They ended up in the main hall, where the original accessibility barrier, the raised stage, had been half demolished and was waiting to be rebuilt at grade. She looked at it for a while. He stood near the temporary entry and let her look. "What made you go into construction?" she said. It wasn't a warm-up question. It was just a question, delivered with the same directness as her questions about load-bearing walls. "My father," he said. He was a carpenter. He would bring me to job sites on weekends when I was a kid, and I don't know, there was something about walking into a space that was being made into something. Like you could see the thinking. He paused. What made you go into architecture? She turned her head slightly. Not toward him, just away from the stage. I wanted to make things that told people they belonged somewhere, she said. Buildings that said, you can come in. You fit here. This was made for someone like you. A pause. I was 11 when my father left. We lived in an apartment building for a while after, my mother and I, and the building it was not made for anyone. It was made to hold people temporarily until they could afford something better. And I thought, someone designed this. Someone made specific decisions that resulted in this place saying, you are not worth considering. And I wanted to be the person who made the opposite decision. She stopped. She had done what she did at the auction again, said more than she intended to, then recognized it. That's a good reason, he said. She didn't respond to this. She turned back to the stage. The grade transition here needs a chamfer. Not in the plans. You should add it. He wrote it down. She left 20 minutes later. He stood in the parking area and watched her navigate the concrete path to her car, a converted vehicle, hand controls, managed with the same efficiency she managed everything. And he thought about an 11-year-old girl in a building that had been made to hold people temporarily until they could afford something better. And about the woman who had built Callaway Design from a room above a dry cleaner's and a $180 drafting table. And about all the ways a person can spend a lifetime arguing with a wound and never quite win the argument. He thought about Dana, who had told him in the last year of her life that the hardest thing was not the dying, but the idea of leaving a 7-year-old who needed a mother and a 30-year-old who still needed to learn that love was not something you had to earn on merit, that you could simply receive it. Dana had believed this. He had spent 3 years learning to believe it too. He was not all the way there yet, but he was closer than he'd been. Inside the building, his crew started a power tool, and the sound echoed in the half-finished hall, and someone laughed at something, and the ordinary work of the day resumed. Ely went back in. He had a masonry sequence to check and a chamfer to add to the plans, and a 7-year-old to pick up at 3:15. He added the chamfer. The call from Carter Voss's office came on a Monday at 11, 9 days before Eli's construction contract was due for its first milestone review with the Community Center Board. Eli didn't know the caller was from Carter Voss's office until Patricia at Callaway Design called him 40 minutes later to warn him. A representative from Voss Capital contacted us this morning, Patricia said, in the clipped tone of a woman who has been handling bad news professionally for a long time, regarding the Community Center project. They want to speak to our principals about a potential conflict of interest. Eli sat down at his kitchen table. What conflict of interest? Their claim is that Naomi's involvement in your project may violate terms of the shareholder agreement she signed when she left the firm. There's a non-compete clause covering commercial accessibility projects within the Asheville city limits. They believe consulting on your project falls under it. Does it? A pause. That's a legal question. Naomi's attorney is reviewing the agreement now. Eli thanked her and hung up and sat at the table for a moment without moving. Then he called Naomi. She picked up on the 4th ring. I know, she said before he could speak. Patricia just called me. I know. I asked her to. She was quiet for a moment. I need you to understand what Carter Voss is doing and why. Okay, Carter was on my board for 6 years. He was a good board member, in the narrow sense that he was always thinking about the company's survival and the investors' returns, and he was very good at identifying the decisions that protected those things. When I had the accident, he made the calculation that a CEO who couldn't be physically present at sites and client meetings was a liability. He wasn't wrong that it would change things. He was wrong about what it would mean. She said this without heat. Just information. He's been running the firm since the settlement. He's done well with it, actually, which I'm aware is a complicated thing to say. And now? Now he's heard about the West Asheville project. The community center has some profile. It's associated with the city initiative. He wants Callaway Design to be the firm of record. If I'm already consulting on it under another arrangement, that complicates his position. So he's using the non-compete to try to remove me from the project, which removes the obstacle, which allows him to approach the community center board directly with Callaway Design Services. She stopped. The non-compete may hold. My attorney says the language is broad enough to potentially cover consulting work. We're looking at it. Eli thought about 9 days to the milestone review. He thought about his 2 crew members and what he was paying them and what he would tell them if the project suspended. He thought about the materials order already delivered and sitting under tarps on the site. If you have to pull out, he said, the permit filing, I know. The permit names me. You'd have to refile with the new architect of record, and that puts you 6 weeks behind at minimum. A pause. I'm looking at the agreement. There may be carve-outs. I'm looking. He believed she was looking. He had watched her look at things for 7 weeks. And looking for Naomi Callaway was not a passive activity. It was what she did instead of hoping. He said, Is there anything I can do? Yes, she said. Don't say anything to the community center board until I've talked to my attorney. Whatever Carter's representative told them, and I'm assuming they've already made contact, I need to understand the exact position before we respond. Okay. And? She stopped. And? A pause that was different from her usual pauses. Shorter, somehow, and more crowded. Don't let them assign a new architect of record without talking to me first, even if it seems like the easier path. Another stop. I want to finish this project. He understood what she was not saying. He understood it the way you understand a thing when someone says it in the key of the things they don't say. Okay, he said. I'll wait. Good, she hung up. He sat at the table for a long time. He thought about the north landing, 3.5 inches below spec, that she had caught before anyone else. He thought about page 7, the door swing, 26 inches clear. He thought about her standing at the half-demolished stage, looking at a space and reading what it said about who was welcome in it, and the 11-year-old girl who had learned to need that answer. He thought, Carter Voss has no idea what he's dealing with. The attorney's review came back in 48 hours. The news was not clean. The non-compete clause did cover independent consulting in the commercial accessibility sector within city limits. There was, however, a provision the attorney had found. The clause specified firm-to-firm competition. Naomi Consulting as an individual, not as a representative of a competing firm, was in a gray area. The attorney recommended a cease-and-desist response, asserting this interpretation and buying time. Carter's team would either accept the interpretation or challenge it, if they challenged it. It went to arbitration, and the timeline became irrelevant to Eli's project. Naomi called Eli with this summary on a Wednesday evening, late, after Maeve was in bed. Eli was at the kitchen table with his laptop open and the project spreadsheet in front of him, and a cold cup of coffee that he kept forgetting to drink. So the gray area is our argument, he said. Our legal position, she said. Not argument. There's a difference. An argument is what you make when you're not sure you're right. A legal position is what you establish when you have something solid to stand on. A pause. It's solid enough. And Carter's team will receive the response tomorrow. We'll know their position by end of week. Her voice was even, but he had been on enough calls with her now to hear the thing underneath. Not fear. Something adjacent. The specific stress of a person who has been in a long fight and has found, just when she thought it was over, that there is one more round. He said, Have you eaten today? A silence. That's not a relevant question. Have you eaten? I had. A pause that suggested she was reviewing and not finding much. I had coffee. That's not food. Eli, I know, he said. I know it's not my business. I'm asking anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Then, why? He thought about this. He said, Because you've been fighting something alone for a long time, and I don't think you're very good at letting other people be concerned about you. Another silence. And in it something happened that he couldn't see and she wouldn't have wanted him to see. A small rearrangement. A thing that had been held very tightly being held just a fraction less so. I'm not very good at it, she confirmed. I know. He closed the laptop. There's a Thai place on Merrimon that delivers to Tunnel Road. I'm ordering something. What do you want? A long pause. Pad see ew, she said. Extra basil. He ordered 2. They stayed on the phone while the food arrived, talking about nothing, about the project, about Maeve's violin progress, about the grade of concrete required for the accessible path versus standard commercial and why the specs varied. And he ate his food and she ate hers, and it was the most ordinary thing that had happened between them and also, in the specific way of ordinary things, one of the most important. Around 10, she said, "I need to tell you something." He set down his fork. "Okay." The accident. The one that, she stopped. "Started again. I've told you what happened to the company. I haven't told you the other part." He waited. "I was driving back from a site visit. Autumn. 2 years ago. I'd been overextending. I always overextended. It was just my pace. My whole career, it was always one more thing. I was on the phone. My hands free, legal, but I was on the phone, and I wasn't paying attention the way I should have been. A breath. The truck that hit me ran a red light. I know that. The investigation confirmed it. But I've also spent 2 years knowing that if I had not been on the phone, I might have seen it half a second sooner. And half a second might have, she didn't finish the sentence. He said quietly, or it might not have changed anything. Yes, she said, or it might not have. But I don't get to know that. He understood this specific kind of not knowing. He had his own version of it, smaller perhaps, but Dana's cardiac event had happened while she was jogging. He had been at a job site. He had not been home. He had told himself 1,000 times that being home would not have changed it, that cardiac events at 31 in otherwise healthy people were simply catastrophic and fast, that there was nothing he could have done. He knew this was true. He also, in the back of his mind, in the drawer you learn to keep closed, did not know. He said, "My wife died 3 years ago. She was jogging. Her heart." He stopped. "I wasn't there. I spent a long time thinking about what I could have changed if I had been." He paused. "I know what that drawer feels like." She didn't say anything immediately. Then, "I'm sorry." "I know," he said. "Me too." They stayed on the line for a moment without speaking, and the silence was not empty. It was the specific fullness of two people who have handed each other something they don't usually carry into the light, and neither has dropped it, and they're both still holding on. "My father told me when I was 12 that I would never amount to anything," she said. It was quieter than everything before it, almost without inflection. The way you say a thing when you have said it so many times inside your own head that the emotion has been worn smooth. He was leaving. He'd already decided he was leaving. I think he wanted to make sure he took something with him. She stopped. "I spent my entire career trying to prove him wrong. And then when the accident happened and the board moved against me, the thing I couldn't stop thinking was, maybe he was right. Maybe I'd just been very good at running until something stopped me." Eli said, "Did you build Callaway Design?" "Yes." "Did you design buildings that said to people, 'You fit here'?" A pause. "Yes." "Then he wasn't right," Eli said. "He was just a man who left. That's the whole of what he was. And you've been giving him a position in your life he didn't earn, and you've been working against a verdict that isn't his to hand down." He stopped. He hadn't meant to say so much. "I know that's—" "Don't say it's easy," she said. "I wasn't going to say it was easy. It's the hardest thing there is. I just spent a lot of time working against a verdict that wasn't mine to hand down either, and someone had to tell me that before I could hear it." "Who told you?" "Dana," he said, "right before she died. She said it because she knew she was dying. She'd had symptoms for weeks that we hadn't investigated properly. She knew something was wrong, and she wanted to make sure I heard it before she couldn't say it anymore." He paused. "I didn't understand it then. I had to learn it after." Naomi was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your daughter is lucky." "I know," he said. "I'm the one who got to stay. She's the one who I try to be worth that." Another silence. Then, very quiet, "I think you are." He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't have diminished it. Carter's team responded to the cease and desist at the end of the week. They challenged it. They were taking it to arbitration. The timeline for arbitration was 6 to 10 weeks. Eli's project milestone was in 5 days. Patricia called him at 8 in the morning on the day she forwarded him the arbitration notice. She said, in her brisk professional way, this doesn't automatically suspend Naomi's consulting involvement. She's still technically engaged pending resolution. But the community center board is going to hear about this, and they're going to have concerns. And you need to get in front of it before Carter's people do. He called the board chair that afternoon and explained the situation plainly. The board chair, a woman named Evelyn Marsh, was experienced enough to not panic. She was also, practically, concerned about the project timeline, which was tied to the grant, and the grant had an end-of-fiscal-year disbursement deadline that was immovable. She said she'd call him back. She called him back at 4. "Mr. Hartman," she said, "I've looked into Miss Calloway's work on this project, and frankly, she's done more in 7 weeks than I've seen some firms do in 3 months. I spoke to our legal counsel. The arbitration is a civil dispute between Ms. Calloway and her former firm, and has no direct standing to remove her from a project she was legitimately engaged on prior to the dispute. We're proceeding. If Carter Voss has an issue with that, he can take it to the city." Eli said, "Thank you. Don't thank me, just finish the project on time." He called Naomi and told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Evelyn Marsh reviewed my work." "She did. What did she say?" "She said you'd done more in 7 weeks than some firms do in 3 months. Another silence. Then, very quietly, "Not for him, for herself, maybe." She said, "Good." He heard something in it. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Something smaller and more durable than either of those. The particular sound of a person who has been waiting a very long time to hear something true, and has finally heard it, and is filing it away in the place where things that are true go. "The mid-milestone review is Friday," he said. "I need you on the call." "I'll be on the call," she said. She was on the call. The milestone review went well, which Eli had expected, and the board approved the continuation of the contract, which he had hoped for but not guaranteed. What he had not expected was the moment, midway through the presentation, when Evelyn Marsh said, "Miss Calloway, your spec correction on the north entrance, the grade transition issue, saved us a costly reinspection. I want that noted in the record." And Naomi, on video, said, "Thank you. It's a common misread of older survey coordinates." Nothing more than that. But when the call ended, Eli sent her a text that said only, "Noted in the record." She sent back, "Don't make it a thing." He sent back, "Already a thing. Deal with it." She didn't respond to that one, which he had come to understand meant she was smiling somewhere in that motel room, or whatever private expression the equivalent of smiling took in a face that had gotten very good at keeping things inside. In the weeks that followed, while the arbitration worked through its preliminary stages and Carter Voss's position slowly clarified itself as expensive and likely to fail, Naomi's attorney found a second carve-out in the agreement, this one cleaner, covering advisory work on projects originated by independent contractors, which the community center project unambiguously was. The construction moved forward, and the project took on the quality of something that has found its rhythm, that knows what it's doing, that has made peace with its own pace. Eli's crew finished the structural modifications in the second week of February. The accessible restroom was completed, inspected, approved. The north entrance was smooth and exact. The interior egress corridors were clear and correct, and the grab bars were on the right walls, and the drinking fountain was at the right height, and the stage, the original inaccessible raised stage, had been rebuilt flush with the main floor, with a gently ramped approach from the east side that was barely perceptible as a ramp. It looked like an architectural choice. Which was the point. Which was what Naomi had said when she specified it. It shouldn't look like accommodation. It should look like design. She had been right. It looked like design. He did not tell Naomi about the payroll situation for 10 days. It was not deception. It was the male contractor's particular version of the same instinct that had led her to attempt the clinical trial without telling him first. The need to know whether you could hold the weight before you handed it to someone else. He could hold it. Barely. But he could. He had 11 days of payroll. By day 8, he'd worked out a short-term arrangement with his material supplier to defer a payment in exchange for a preferential bid on a future project, which was not ideal but was real. By day 10, he'd taken on a small residential bathroom modification job on the side, a rush job for a client who needed accessible modifications after a family member came home from the hospital. The kind of job he could complete in 2 days with one crew member. He was up until 1 in the morning 2 nights running doing the estimate and the permit research. By day 11, the community center contract suspension had been formally challenged through Evelyn Marsh's attorney and his own insurance carrier's legal support line. And the combined position was strong enough that Carter's team accepted a temporary stay of the suspension pending the arbitration outcome. The project could continue. He would not have to tell his crew. He told Naomi on the 12th day about all of it. Not because the crisis was over and he could say so safely, but because she called him on the 12th day to ask about the day 14 sequencing, and he heard something in her voice that was different. And he understood she had found out some of it, and he owed her the whole of it. Patricia told me the contract was under review, she said, before he could begin. I know, he said. I should have told you. A pause. Then yes, she said. You should have. Not because I would have fixed it, I might not have been able to, but because we are building something together, and building things together means not going silent when the structure is under load. That's when silence is most dangerous. He said, noted. And the payroll? She said. He told her about the payroll. She was quiet for a long moment. Then the short-term supplier arrangement. What are the terms? He told her the terms. That's actually a reasonable deal, she said. Did you negotiate the timeline yourself? Yes. Good. A beat. Eli, next time, tell me sooner. I know, he said. Not because I think you need to be managed, she said. Quieter, because I have been the person doing the equivalent thing for 18 months, keeping the weight by myself, telling no one the extent of it, wearing myself down to nothing, and I would like to not watch someone I care about do the same thing. He heard. Someone I care about. He said, carefully, point taken. Good, she said. The day 14 sequencing. He pulled up the schedule. They worked through it. But the thing she had said was there in the room with him for the rest of the evening, and probably for several evenings after. The arbitration ruling came in on a Tuesday, while Eli was on site and his phone was in his jacket pocket, and he didn't see Naomi's text until he was back at the truck at 2 in the afternoon. The text said, simply, ruling in my favor. Non-compete does not apply to independent consulting. Carter's position rejected. He called her. She picked up immediately. You saw the text. Just now. Naomi, he stopped. Congratulations, it's the correct ruling, she said, in the same tone she used for specifications. Then, quieter. Yes. Thank you. He heard what was underneath. The 18 months. The legal fees and the depositions and the patient explanations of what the board had been legally entitled to do, and the house sold at $340,000 instead of what it was worth, and the motel on Tunnel Road and the yellow legal pad and the coffee cup she always let go cold. This means you can consult freely, he said, going forward, not just on this project. Yes, and the firm? Callaway Design is Carter's. That didn't change. But my right to practice isn't his to take away. A pause. I can rebuild. Not what I had. Something different. Something she stopped. Something, he said. I've been thinking about that. About what? About something different. Something you could build. He stopped. I don't want to pitch you on a phone call. Then pitch me somewhere else. He paused. Dinner, Friday, I'll cook. A long silence. You'll cook. I'm a reasonably good cook. Maeve is a harsh critic, and I've been meeting her standards for 3 years, which is a higher bar than it sounds. She was quiet for a moment. He thought she might say no. He had prepared to be told no, and had decided it would be all right. What are you making? She said. Whatever you want. Another silence. Then, something with garlic. I can do garlic, he said. Then yes, she said. The Friday dinner did not go as planned, which was maybe the best thing that could have happened to it. Eli's car broke down on Wednesday morning, 3 blocks from Maeve's school. Not dramatically, no smoke, no alarming sounds. But the engine simply stopped, with the cheerful finality of something that has been giving you warnings for months that you have been too busy to hear. And now it was done warning you. He called the repair shop and they said Thursday at the earliest, possibly Friday, and possibly meant probably. And he understood that the dinner on Friday was now contingent on whether the universe had decided to be cooperative, which it had given him no particular reason to trust. He called Naomi at 8:45 in the morning. Standing on the sidewalk while a tow truck maneuvered toward his car, and Maeve stood on the curb eating a cereal bar and watching the tow truck with genuine professional interest. "The car is dead," he said. "How dead?" "Engine died on Kimberly Avenue. Shop says possibly Friday." A pause. Then, "Maeve needs to get to school." "I'm working on it," he said. "I can call a car service? I'll arrange it," she said. "The motel uses a local accessible transport service for my appointments. I'll book one for her." He started to say he didn't need her to do that and stopped, because what he actually needed was for Maeve to get to school, and Naomi was offering to solve that problem. And the habit of refusing help was not the same as the habit of refusing it for good reasons. "Thank you," he said. "Send me the school address." He sent it. The car arrived in 12 minutes. Maeve accepted this development with the adaptable equanimity of a child who had spent 7 years learning that when things went wrong, her father usually found a way, and lately had been dimly aware that the way sometimes had help in it. What he had not accounted for was that Naomi's transport service had a scheduling gap. The motel had pre-booked the slot for a different appointment that morning, and Maeve arrived not at school, which was closed for a teacher conference day Eli had completely forgotten, but back at Naomi's motel. Patricia had tried to reach him. His phone had been busy with the tow truck coordinator. He found out at 10:15. He called Naomi, slightly panicked. She answered before the first ring finished. "She's fine," she said. "She's here. She's told me about the violin." A pause. At length. He exhaled. "I'm so sorry. I forgot it was a conference day. It's all right. I have work to do." She has apparently decided to help. The faintest dryness. "She is currently reorganizing my legal pad system, which she says is wrong." "Maeve," he said. "Maeve, she is reorganizing your—" "It's all right," she said again, and this time there was something different in it. Not just the word, the tone underneath, slightly warmer than professional, not yet something he had a name for. "I'll get there as soon as I can," he said. "There's no urgency. She's fine." He got there at noon, which was the earliest the tow truck situation allowed. He knocked on the motel room door, and it was Maeve who opened it. Already comfortable, already at home. Sitting cross-legged on the floor with a sheet of paper and a set of colored markers that had appeared from somewhere. Naomi was at the desk with the laptop open and the yellow legal pad beside her. The drafting table was against the wall, as it always was in the photos of the motel room. She had apparently arranged for it to be brought from storage shortly after she moved in. It was too large for the room technically, but she had made the space work around it, the way she made everything work, by deciding what the space required and arranging accordingly. "You're here," Maeve said. "I'm here," Eli said. He looked at Naomi. "I'm sorry. You keep apologizing for things that aren't catastrophic," she said, without looking up from the laptop. "It's a habit worth examining." Maeve said, "I like it here. It smells like wood and coffee." Eli looked at the drafting table. It did, he realized. It had that particular smell of old drafting tables, mineral and faintly organic, the kind of smell that adheres to things that have been used hard for a long time. He had noticed it in his workshop. He hadn't thought about where it had come from. Maeve had been drawing. She gathered her paper and walked to Naomi and presented it without preamble. Naomi looked up from the laptop. Maeve held up the drawing. It was a house. Not detailed. Maeve was 7, but a house with big windows and a ramp at the front door, which he suspected was a recent addition to her architectural vocabulary, and 3 figures standing in front of it. One small, one medium, one slightly taller and in what was clearly a wheelchair. Naomi looked at the drawing for a long moment. "That's us," Maeve said. "That's you and me and Daddy." He watched Naomi's face. He watched the thing that happened to it, which was not a smile and not the suppression of a smile, but something more fundamental, a rearrangement, a settling. The specific expression of a person who has been holding themselves at a distance from something for a long time and has just discovered the distance has collapsed without their permission. "That's a good house," Naomi said. Her voice was even, just slightly. "I put a ramp," Maeve said, "so you can get in. I see that." Naomi looked at the drawing for another moment. Then she said, quietly, "I can get in." Maeve nodded, satisfied, and went back to her markers. Naomi set the drawing carefully on the corner of the desk and looked at it for another second. Then she looked at Eli. He was already looking at her, and he didn't look away, and she didn't look away, and neither of them said anything, and the moment was exactly the right length. Then she looked back at the laptop. "Sit down if you're staying," she said. "I'm in the middle of something." He sat down. She was in the middle of a business plan. He could see this from across the room, the structure of the document visible on the screen even at an angle. The header text he couldn't quite read, but the format he recognized. 30 pages, maybe more. She had been working on it for a while. "What is that?" he said. "A proposal," she said. "I've been thinking about what you said, about something different, something I could build." He waited. "The arbitration ruling gives me my consulting license back cleanly. Carter has the firm. I don't want the firm back. Not the way it was. But what I know how to do, the work I'm actually good at, accessibility, integrated design, the compliance documentation, the spec writing, that doesn't require a full-sized firm. It requires someone who knows what they're doing and someone who can execute it." She said the last part without looking at him. "I'm the first part." He understood. He said, "I'm the second. You'd have to be willing to shift your model. Less general contracting, more specialized renovation, accessible modifications, barrier-free retrofits. The market is underserved. There are more buildings that need to be corrected than there are contractors who understand how to correct them without making the result look like an afterthought." She finally looked at him. "The drafting table is already in your workshop. We might as well use it." He felt something move in his chest that was not complicated but was wide. "What's the name?" She turned back to the laptop and scrolled to the top of the document. He could read the header now. "Threshold Works," she said. He stayed until 3 in the afternoon, and they worked. Actually worked. The way they had been working for 7 weeks, but now in the same room, which was different in the way that most things are different when the distance collapses. Maeve drew 2 more houses and fell asleep on the motel bed with her markers still in her hand, and Naomi looked at the sleeping child and the markers and said nothing. But she pulled the blanket from the foot of the bed and covered her without a word, efficiently, like someone who has not done this before and does it anyway. Eli saw this and did not say anything either. At 3 he woke Maeve gently and gathered her coat and her drawings, and Naomi's car service drove them home because his car was still at the shop. At the door, Maeve hugged Naomi, which Naomi had not visibly braced for. She accepted it with both arms. The way you accept things that arrive before you've decided whether you're ready for them. Maeve said, against Naomi's shoulder, "Are you our family?" He saw Naomi's expression above Maeve's head. Saw the thing the question did to it. The blow of it, gentle and precise. "I'm your friend," Naomi said. Carefully, Maeve leaned back and looked at her with the clear-eyed assessment of a child who has learned to read the difference between what adults say and what they mean. "Okay," she said. "But you feel like family." She went out to the car. Eli stayed for a moment, and Naomi was looking at the door and not at him, and he said, Don't. She said, softly, "Don't explain her. She's right." A pause. "She's just right?" he said, very quietly. "Yeah." He went out to the car. The service drove them home. In the back seat, Maeve fell asleep against the window, and the afternoon light was long and pale on the streets of Asheville, and Eli drove the 3 blocks from the motel that he couldn't drive, because his car was in the shop, and he thought about thresholds, the technical definition, which was the point at which one space ends and another begins, and which Naomi had spent her career making navigable for people who needed them to be. And the other definition, the one that wasn't in building specs, the one that was just, the moment before you step through. He thought he might be standing at one. The business plan went to filing on a Wednesday in early March, with both their names on it, Naomi Calloway and Eli Hartman, trading as Threshold Works. Naomi's apartment search had concluded 2 weeks earlier. She had found a ground floor unit in South Asheville accessible, with enough space for a home office, and she had moved out of the Tunnel Road Motel with 2 suitcases and a laptop bag, and the yellow legal pad, and the drafting table, which Eli had moved with his truck. The Friday dinner happened the week after filing, not 3 weeks later. He had gotten the timeline slightly wrong in his memory. The way you misremember the chronology of important events, because your brain is indexing by feeling, not by calendar. What is accurate is this. He made chicken with a great deal of garlic and roasted vegetables and bread that came out better than intended, and Maeve ate her portion in 4 minutes and excused herself with the diplomacy that suggested she had given the matter some prior thought. Naomi ate slowly. Not the way people eat slowly when they're not hungry. The way people eat slowly when they're paying attention to where they are. He refilled her water glass without being asked, because he had noticed she forgot to drink when she was concentrating, which had nothing to do with the wheelchair and everything to do with the specific quality of attention she brought to whatever was in front of her. It crowded everything else out, including water. She noticed him refilling it and said nothing. She also drank it. After dinner, she sat at his kitchen table with the Threshold Works draft contracts spread around her, making corrections in pen. She had printed them specifically to correct by hand, which he suspected she did because her handwritten corrections were legible to everyone, and her digital ones sometimes got lost in versions. He washed the dishes and listened to Maeve practice violin in the other room, badly but with commitment, and thought, this is a Thursday evening. Just a Thursday. Nothing remarkable about it at all. The unremarkable quality of it was exactly the point. At 9, Maeve came through in her pajamas to say goodnight. She hugged him. Then she stopped in front of Naomi and held out her arms. Naomi, who had not, in the course of the evening, been uncertain about a single specification or a single sentence, was, for a half second, clearly uncertain about this. Then she accepted the hug with both arms and held Maeve the way she held her legal pad, carefully like something that mattered. "Good night," Maeve said. "Good night," Naomi said. Maeve went to bed. Naomi looked at the contracts for a moment without seeing them. Then she picked up the pen and went back to work. He dried the last dish and put it away and came to sit across from her at the table, and she pushed a sheaf of corrected pages toward him without looking up and said, "Read those." He read them. They were better than the originals. The community center project entered its final phase in late March, with a completion date in early April that Eli had held on to through the permit delays and the arbitration and the ice storm and the engine that had quietly quit on Kimberly Avenue. The final walkthrough was scheduled for April 3rd. The opening reception, organized by the center's board, for April 9th. Naomi put both dates in her calendar. She also, quietly, without telling Eli, put a third date in her calendar. A medical appointment. At a neurology practice in Biltmore that had been calling her, on and off, for 3 months about a clinical trial for nerve stimulation therapy. She had been ignoring the calls for the same reason she had ignored a lot of things. Not because she didn't want to know, but because wanting to know was the part that was dangerous. She returned the call on a Tuesday morning in March, sitting at the drafting table in her new apartment, the pale spring light coming through the window, the yellow legal pad open to a blank page. The neurologist's name was Dr. Francis Cho. She said, "We've been hoping you'd call back." Naomi said, "Tell me what the trial involves." She listened for 45 minutes. She took notes. She did not tell Eli. Not because she wanted to hide it, because she needed to find out who she was in this without any witnesses, and when she came out of it, she would tell him everything. She was tired of waiting to find out who she was. Threshold Works received its first client inquiry in the second week of March, 6 days after the filing. A property manager in North Asheville had heard about the community center project through a city planning newsletter and wanted to know if there was a firm that could assess her building's accessibility compliance without the overhead of a full architectural firm. Patricia, who had become, without anyone formally arranging it, their part-time coordinator. She had technically quit Callaway Design the week Carter's team filed the arbitration, gave the property manager Naomi's number. Naomi called her back within an hour. The assessment took 3 days. Naomi did the compliance analysis, documented the deficiencies, wrote the specification corrections. Eli came in on day 2 to do a physical walk of the site, taking measurements and noting construction constraints. They worked efficiently and without friction, which was not because they had arranged to. It was because they had been working for months, and the rhythm between them had settled into something that had no wasted motion. The property manager paid the invoice and sent a referral within the week. The referral became a contract. The contract was for a dental office conversion, a ground floor unit in a building that had been built in the late 90s before the ADA guidelines tightened, and that needed a complete accessibility overhaul of its entry, waiting area, and 2 treatment rooms. It was not a large project, but it was theirs. Eli's crew started in the 3rd week of March. Naomi reviewed the drawings at the drafting table in the Threshold Works office on Lexington. They had secured a small space, 2 rooms, more than adequate, and sent corrections that were now addressed to both the crew lead and the client simultaneously, which saved approximately 1 step per issue and added up, over the course of the project, to several hours of collective time. The dental office manager walked the finished space with them on a Thursday afternoon in late March, and she stood at the accessible entrance and said, "It doesn't look like an afterthought." Naomi said, "It shouldn't. Accessibility is an original design condition, not a retrofit consideration." The dental office manager looked at her, then at Eli, then at the space. She said, "I'm going to tell everyone I know about you." She did. She told everyone she knew. By April, before the community center opened, Threshold Works had 3 more assessments scheduled and 1 additional conversion project under letter of intent. It was not, by any reasonable measure, a large firm. But it was, by Naomi's specific measure. The measure she had developed age 24 in a room above a dry cleaner's, exactly the right size to be doing exactly the right work. She had built something. Again, different this time, which was the part she had needed to know was possible. Not the company she lost. Something that was hers in a new way, made from what she had learned and what she had lost and what she had found in the meantime. She looked at the drafting table one evening when the office was empty and the spring light was long on the Lexington Street pavement outside. The table was stained and battered, and the brass rail was tarnished, and the tilted surface had 2 new marks on it, from project folders slid across it too quickly. It looked exactly like what it was, a piece of furniture that had been used, and used again for the thing it was made for. She put her hand on the surface. She thought, "I dragged you back from Black Mountain in a rented pickup truck when I was 24 years old, and I put you in a room above a dry cleaner's, and I sat in front of you and thought I might actually know what I was doing. I still don't know," she thought, "but I know more than I did." That seemed like enough to keep going. The trial evaluation took 2 days. MRIs, nerve conduction tests, consultations with 3 specialists who looked at her spine the way architects look at a compromised structure, not with regret, but with specific interest in what could still be done. Dr. Cho had the manner of a person who doesn't promise things she doesn't believe, and she said, "Your injury profile is actually a strong candidate. The nerve pathways below T10 have more residual conductivity than typical at this stage. We've seen this pattern before. It doesn't guarantee outcome, but it gives us something to work with." Naomi said, "What's the failure rate?" Dr. Cho said, 28% at the intervention level we're proposing. Failure means no meaningful change, not regression. And success? In the successful trial participants, we've seen standing ability with support. In some cases, limited assisted walking. We don't promise walking. We can't. But the evidence suggests meaningful functional improvement is achievable in your case. She paused. The treatment involves 12 weeks of sessions. There will be significant discomfort. I want to be accurate about that. Naomi said, "When would I start?" She started on a Wednesday in mid-March. She did not tell Eli for 3 weeks, which was not deception. She told herself it was not deception, but was the specific privacy of someone who has spent a long time being looked at, assessed, evaluated on the basis of what her body could and couldn't do. And who needed one thing in her life that existed in a space where she was allowed to just be trying, without an audience? She told him on a Thursday evening, at the kitchen table. Maeve was in bed. The legal pad was between them. She had been sitting with the disclosure for 20 minutes, looking for the right way to say it. And at some point she understood that there was no right way, and said it straight. I'm in a clinical trial. Nerve stimulation therapy. I've been in it for 3 weeks. Eli set down his coffee. He looked at her. He said, "Okay, it may not work," she said. "The success rate, you don't have to explain the success rate to me," he said. "I'm not going to tell you how to feel about it." She had prepared for a number of responses. Not that one. "You're not going to tell me it's going to be fine?" "I don't know if it's going to be fine," he said. "I hope it works. I hope it works a lot. But I know you, and I know you don't need me to tell you something will be fine that I can't actually guarantee." He looked at her for a moment. "How is it going?" She let out a breath, harder than I expected. "The sessions are intense. There's an 8-week protocol before we'd see any functional change, if there's going to be one. I'm in week 4. 4 more weeks. 4 more weeks." He nodded. He looked at the legal pad. He said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes. Why didn't you tell me when you started?" She thought about the honest answer and gave it. "Because I needed to know I was doing it for myself, not for anyone else." She met his eyes. "And because I was scared. And I didn't want anyone to see that." "I see it," he said. "Gently, I know," she said. "I know you do." She had let him see it. That was its own thing. 4 more weeks passed the way weeks pass when you are paying close attention, faster than you want and slower than you can bear. The community center project finished on schedule, which Ely reported to her with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has held a timeline through an ice storm, an engine failure, a legal challenge, and 17 other things that had not made it into the project log because he had resolved them before they became problems. She received this news with the quiet satisfaction of a person who had helped make it possible and did not need to say so. The opening reception was April 9th. She told Dr. Cho she would need April 8th free of sessions. "Doctor," Cho said that worked. She said, "Also, we'd like you to come in the evening of April 8th. There's something we'd like to show you." Naomi said, "What, doctor?" Cho said, "Come and see." Naomi went on the evening of April 8th, alone to the neurology clinic in Biltmore. She did not tell Eli. She told herself she would tell him everything. After, she was there for 90 minutes. She came home with photographs that Dr. Cho's assistant had taken at her request. Photographs she put in the top drawer of her desk and would show Eli at the reception the next evening, when she was ready, when the moment had made a space for itself in the ordinary movement of the day. She sat for a long time in her apartment after she got back. The drafting table was against the wall. The spring night was quiet on the streets of South Asheville. The yellow legal pad was open to a page she hadn't written anything on yet. She picked up the pen. She wrote, at the top of the page, "What next?" She sat with it. Then she wrote underneath, "Everything." She closed the pad. She went to bed. She slept 7 hours, which was not as long as she used to sleep, but was better than it had been for 2 years. And in the morning she made coffee and opened the curtains and looked at the April sunlight on the street and felt, for the 3rd time in her life, the first time having been in front of the battered drafting table she dragged to a room above a dry cleaner's. The second time in a winter afternoon, watching a 7-year-old fall asleep on a motel bed, like she might actually know what she was doing. The reception was at 6. She was ready at 5:45. The West Asheville Community Center opened on a Thursday evening that was clear and cold in the way April sometimes is in the mountains. The sky fully dark by 6, but with the quality of lightness underneath it that felt like promise. The building was lit from inside, warm and steady, and from the parking area you could see the north entrance. The entrance with the corrected landing, the gentle grade, the properly positioned tactile strip, and it looked like a building that had been made to welcome people in, which was the point, which had always been the point. Maeve wore her good dress. She had opinions about her good dress and had shared them at length, but she was wearing it. She held Eli's hand in the parking lot and looked at the building with the same professional seriousness she had brought to the auction 6 months ago. "We did that," she said. "Naomi and I did that," Eli said. "You helped. I reorganized the legal pad system." "You did," he said. "It was genuinely useful." She accepted this. Inside, the community center's board had organized the reception with the particular care of people who understand that a building, on the night it opens, is still carrying the meaning of everything it took to make it. Evelyn Marsh moved through the room with the satisfied precision of someone checking items off a mental list. The accessible restroom doors were propped open for viewing. The grab bars were exactly where Naomi had said they should be. The stage, rebuilt flush with the floor, was fully in use. A local musician had set up at one end and was playing something quiet and unhurried that filled the space without dominating it. Naomi arrived on her own, which Eli had known she would. She came through the north entrance, and he watched her from across the room, the clean transition from outside to in, no lip, no bump. No pause to manage the threshold, and he thought, she designed this. She designed the thing that makes her own entrance easy, and she designed it for every person who will come in after her, and if that wasn't proof that his father had been wrong about everything, he didn't know what was. He crossed the room to her. She had dressed carefully, not formally, but with the precision she brought to everything, as if knowing that the occasion mattered and deciding to meet it on those terms. She looked at the room the way she had looked at the site in mid-construction, reading it, finding what it said. "Well?" he said. She turned to him. "The interior egress corridor," she said, 2 inches wider than the spec. He waited. "I told your crew 3 inches wider," she said. "They got it right." He grinned. She saw it and looked away, which was also her version of smiling. "The stage is correct," she said, "and the parking," she stopped. She was looking at something across the room. Carter Voss was there. He stood near the drinks table with the contained stillness of a man who knows he is in a room where he has lost something and has decided to be there anyway. He looked older than his photographs. He looked like a man who had done what he thought was right and lived long enough to have more complicated feelings about it. Naomi looked at him for a moment. Then she maneuvered her chair across the room. Eli followed, at a distance. Close enough. Carter Voss saw her coming. He straightened. There was something in his face that was not guilt, but was adjacent. The specific expression of a person who has spent time with the accounting. "Naomi," he said. "Carter," she said. A pause. The room moved around them. "The project is remarkable," he said. "Patricia sent me the specifications. The work you did on the accessibility integration, it's exactly the kind of design we should have been doing." "Yes," she said. "It is." He held her gaze. He said, "I thought I was protecting the company." "I know you did," she said. "You were wrong about the cost." He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. "Just that. You should know," he said, "that I've been speaking to the board about your consulting contributions on this project. It's been noted." Evelyn Marsh noted it in the record, she said. "I'm aware. The firm is yours," she said. Not harshly, just finally. "Carter, the firm is yours. I'm building something else. It's going to be good." She looked at him for one more second. Then she turned her chair away. She came back to Eli. She looked up at him. "Done," she said. He said, "Are you okay?" She considered the question. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes." They stood together for a moment, and Evelyn Marsh found them and thanked them both and introduced them to 3 board members who had questions about the design approach, and Maeve appeared from somewhere with a plate of small appetizers that she had gathered with focused efficiency, and the evening moved in the warm and ordinary way of evenings that have earned their warmth. It was near the end, when the reception was winding down and people were beginning to gather coats and finish conversations, that a man Eli didn't know, a city council member he'd been told, who had championed the original funding, stopped them near the entrance and shook Eli's hand and said, "I understand you were the contractor on this project. How did you come to work with Miss Calloway?" Eli glanced at Naomi. She was looking at something across the room. Not deliberately away, just elsewhere. For a moment. He said, "She had an auction. About 6 months ago. She was selling her house and everything in it. I went because I heard there was equipment. He paused. There was one piece I ended up bidding on, an old drafting table. My daughter said it was lonely. The council member looked at him with the polite attention of someone processing a story that has not arrived where expected. Eli said, I didn't know whose it was until later. But that's how we met. He paused. A disabled CEO auctioned everything she owned, and I was the single dad who bid on one thing. He said it quietly, without emphasis, as a thing that had happened and that had turned into this. Turns out the table was the whole business plan. He felt Naomi go still beside him. He looked at her. She was looking at him. Not the room, not across the reception, at him. With an expression he had no single word for, because it was composed of a number of things that didn't often appear together in the same face. The specific precision of a person who is filing something away carefully. The specific warmth of a person who has received something they didn't know how to ask for. The specific stillness of a person who is standing at a threshold and has decided finally to step through. She said, very quietly, that's not quite right. Which part? The table wasn't the whole business plan. She held his gaze. You were. The council member had the good sense to be elsewhere. They were alone in the way you're alone in a crowded room when the room stops being relevant. Eli crouched down, his habit, so their eyes were level. He said, what are we? She knew what he was asking. She said, we're threshold works. Naomi, we're us. She said, whatever us is, we're that. She looked at him for a moment. I don't have better words yet. I'll find them. She stopped. Eli, there's something I want to tell you. She reached into her bag and took out 3 photographs. She handed them to him. They were taken the night before in a neurology clinic, in a long room with parallel bars and bright fluorescent lights. They were taken at 7:15 in the evening. Doctor Cho's assistant with a phone camera and Naomi's insistence on documentation. In the first photograph, she was holding the parallel bars with both hands. In the second, she had released the left bar. In the third, she was upright, left hand at her side, right hand barely touching the right bar, and she was standing. Not for long. 4 seconds, Doctor, Cho had said. 4 seconds and then she'd sat back down, but standing. Eli looked at the photographs for a long time. He did not make a sound. His face did the thing faces do when something has been waited for long enough that the arrival of it is too large for an immediate response. He looked at the photographs and then he looked at her. 4 seconds, she said. It's not much. It's everything, he said. I know. He said, I know it's not a promise. I know it might stay at 4 seconds. I know. He looked at her. But you were standing. You stood up. She said, I thought of you. He didn't say anything. When I stood up, she said, I thought Eli's going to hear about this. She looked at her hands. I've been thinking about telling you. I wanted to tell you and I wanted the right. She stopped. I wanted you to see it. I see it, he said. Maeve found them then, appearing at Eli's elbow with a half-eaten cookie and the uncanny instinct of a 7-year-old who knows when a moment is happening. She looked at her father's face and then at Naomi's face, and she said nothing. She took Naomi's hand. She held it. Outside, through the glass of the corrected north entrance, the April night was cold and full of stars. The building was lit warm behind them. The accessible path led to a parking lot where people were saying their good nights, and the musician inside had switched to something slower, something you could settle into. On the way to the car, Eli with Maeve on his back half asleep, Naomi beside him on the smooth and correctly graded path. She reached over and put her hand on the drafting table that wasn't there. A small automatic gesture, the kind the body makes toward the things it's been orienting around, and then she laughed, quietly at herself. What? He said. Nothing, she said. Just, it's not here. It's at the office, he said. I know. She looked ahead. That's where it should be. He looked at her. She was looking at the night, the parking lot, the world arrayed in front of them in its ordinary configuration, and she was looking at it the way she had looked at buildings, reading what it said, finding the thing underneath the surface, seeing what the space was actually for. He thought. She sees forward now. He thought. That's all forward ever is. The moment you can see it again. There are things this story is sometimes mistaken for. It is mistaken, sometimes, for a rescue story. The man who showed up and saved the woman who had fallen. But that is not what happened. Nobody saved anybody. Nobody waited to be saved. What happened was two people who had each, in their own way, learned the hard cost of a closed door, and who met at an auction on a 31-degree morning and slowly, over months of specifications and coffee deliveries and ice storms and legal challenges, and a 7-year-old who saw the important things before anyone told her to look, opened the doors to each other. That is not rescue. That is something that requires more from both people than rescue does. It is mistaken sometimes for a recovery story, as if the photographs from April 8th, 4 seconds on her feet, were the end of something, the proof that it had all been worth it, the repairing of the thing that broke. But Naomi would tell you, and she is precise about words, that recovery is not the right frame. Recovery implies returning to a prior state. She is not trying to return to anything. She is trying to arrive at something she has not been before. Something that includes both the woman who built a company in a room above a dry cleaner's with a $180 drafting table, and the woman who spent 2 years in a motel on Tunnel Road with a yellow legal pad and no particular sense of forward, and the woman standing 4 seconds in a parallel bar room thinking about telling someone. She is building forward. That is different from recovery. What Eli did was not complicated. He did not fix anything. He was not a man with solutions. He was a man who, once he understood what she was doing, simply refused to stop being present for it. He sent the coffee. He moved the masonry sequence. He waited when she needed to find out who she was without a witness. He crouched down so their eyes were level in a parking lot after an April reception and asked a question that didn't require an answer bigger than us. He had learned this from a woman who had told him, right before she died, that love was not something you earned. He had spent 3 years learning what she meant. He had learned it finally in the particular way that some things are learned, not in a single understanding but in the practice, one day at a time, of being someone who shows up. Maeve drew another house. She drew it 2 weeks after the reception, and this one had 4 people in front of it instead of 3. The small one, the medium one, the taller one in the wheelchair, and a new one that was approximately as tall as the wheelchair figure and labeled, in her careful 7-year-old hand, Dr. Cho. She taped it to the side of the drafting table in the Threshold Works office. It's still there. The drafting table is still there, in the corner of the office on Lexington Avenue, not the same building above the dry cleaners. Naomi had checked. The dry cleaners was a coffee shop now, but on the same street, a few blocks from where she first set up. She works at it on the days she comes in. Some days she comes in standing, for a few minutes at a time, one hand on the brass rail along the bottom edge that she never minded when it was a surface for leaning on. Most days she's in her chair. The chair is not a lesser version of herself. Neither is the standing. She is simply Naomi. She has stopped trying to be what her father said she wouldn't be, or what the board said she couldn't be, or what the accident said was done. She is just trying to be Naomi, which is, it turns out, more than sufficient. This is what the refusal was, in the end. Not stubbornness. Not perseverance, which is the word people use when they want to make endurance sound inspiring. Just presence. The decision to keep being present for someone even when it would have been easier to step back. The decision to keep being present for yourself even when you had forgotten the point. Eli has a word for it. He has had it since Dana gave it to him, and he has been practicing it ever since, in pancakes and permit filings and coffee deliveries and crouching down to eye level in parking lots on April nights. The word is love. But the practice is this: showing up. That's the whole of it, really. Refusal is not stubbornness. It is just love with a longer memory. If you believe in showing up when it costs you something, leave a heart below. And tell me what town you're watching from.